Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jane McAdam and I'm the Director of the Kaldor Centre for International Refugee Law at the University of New South Wales. And it's my very great pleasure to welcome you here this evening and to welcome all of those who are watching us online. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us today. I would also like to acknowledge the many refugees and other displaced people who are joining us tonight, whether here in person or online. I'd also like to apologise for the long delay in commencing the proceedings tonight. Our guest of honour and his collaborator and translator have been delayed, diverted with flights around most of the country, it would seem, on account of severe storms here in Sydney. They are now on the ground. They are hopefully in a car en route here. But we thought, well, given everybody's here joining us and your immense appreciation for Behrouz and the fact he is with us in Australia, we would delay the event, but commence with a lineup of some of the original and some new panellists. And I would like to introduce them to you now. Ben Doherty, who is at the far end here, is an acclaimed journalist with The Guardian, and he was one of the collaborators with Behrouz Boochani on the book that we are here to talk about this evening. I would then like to introduce Munez, who was another long-standing collaborator with Behrouz, and we are delighted, is able to be here with us in person tonight. She's a community arts and cultural development worker who's been working for a long time with migrants and people seeking asylum here in Australia. And she's a content producer for SBS Radio, the Persian program. Then we have Madeline Gleeson, who is Senior Research Fellow at the Kaldor Centre and the author of Offshore, which many of you would know as really shining a light on the policies that Australia has practiced for far too many years now. Beside her, we have Zaki Haidari, who came here seeking asylum from Afghanistan, has been living with temporary protection for a very long time now, trying to rebuild his life. He is working with Amnesty International as the refugee rights campaigner and is an ambassador for RACS, the Refugee Advice and Casework Service. And on talking about RACS, I'd like to welcome Sarah Dale, who is our moderator this evening. Sarah is the principal solicitor and director of RACS, and works and with her team tirelessly to support people seeking asylum or living in precarious situations here in Australia. As I mentioned, we are here to celebrate the new work, which I'll get the name right of this time, Freedom Only Freedom, which is a collection that Behrouz put together of his, but also other people's writings. And he really needs no introduction. However, prior to his, prior to his arrival, you know, I was thinking, well, we waited so many years to have him here in person. What's another hour or so? We did wonder whether we could run this event through WhatsApp messages, which is how he wrote his first book, but we decided against that as well. And he will be joined when he arrives with his collaborator, Omid Tofighian, who is a lecturer, researcher and community advocate, combining philosophy with interests in citizen media, popular culture, displacement and discrimination. So the way we'll run this is to have a discussion here now with our panellists and then welcome Behrouz Boochani and Omid Tofighian when they arrive. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for your patience. And I'm also going to ask you to forgive my rudeness as I'm checking the chat and also checking my mobile just to see where our guests are at. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. I'm paying absolute attention, but just making sure our guests are on their way. As Jane has introduced, I'm Sarah Dale, the Centre Director of RACS, and it's my absolute pleasure to be now leading this two-part panel this evening. For this initial section, we will be reflecting on what it is that Behrouz, his resistance, his movement, his activism, what impact that has had on the refugee movement here in Australia. And so with that framing, I'm going to throw firstly to Ben Doherty to reflect on what impact it is that Behrouz's work has had on the refugee movement in Australia.
Thank you, Sarah, and good evening, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it will, alongside my panelists, and it will be an even greater pleasure once Behrouz turns up. This is very Behrouz, but it's he has been one of the most extraordinary voices of the last decade in Australian journalism. For a man who couldn't set foot in this country, he has had an extraordinary impact on our understanding of Australian asylum policies, the way they operate, the impact they have on people, and the actual reality of the ground of the way these policies work on the ground. I was reading the brief chapter I contributed to this book, and I remember now distinctly the beginnings of our collaboration, and I didn't know his name. I was sort of newly installed as the immigration correspondent for The Guardian, and we recognised that this recently reintroduced policy of offshore detention was being hugely underreported, and we just knew nothing about it. It was this arcane world that was very, very hard to see into. We didn't know what was going. You know, you'll remember the days of we don't talk about on-water matters and offshore matters and this sort of veil of secrecy. And there was just, it felt impenetrable initially. And then, you know, like most journalists, you just start ringing people. You just start, what can you tell me about this? Who can I talk to? How do I understand what's going on here? And eventually someone came back and told me, look, there's someone in Manus who's got a phone. We can put you in touch. And they wouldn't tell me who it was or anything about them. And he was in my phone as Manus contact. And that's how we started. And we started in this sort of, when the signal was enough, we'd a little WhatsApp message back and forth. And terribly unconventional, but ultimately, I think incredibly vital journalistic collaboration emerged out of that. In that we were able to get an insight into exactly what was happening there, and who better to, I suppose, to tell the story of what's happening in that place, what those policies look like, how they operate, than someone standing at the centre of it, someone in its epicentre. And Behrouz was initially, and understandably, quite reticent, quite nervous. He was, and you can understand in those early months on Manus Island, this new regime all around you, these high wire fences, these guards everywhere. You have no idea of where the boundaries really are, the extent of your freedom. So there were just little bits of information that would come from Behrouz. He'd say, this is happening. We've been moved here. This is the new procedure for medical. This is what we're being told about how our claims of protection are being processed. And so we gradually started to build this picture of what was happening. And then Behrouz started to work out where the boundaries were. He felt a bit more confident. He could offer a quote, you know, an asylum seeker inside Manus, an Iranian refugee in Manus Detention Centre. He gradually became more confident. He was incredibly humble in what he knew and what he didn't know. If he didn't know something, he'd go away and find it out. He'd talk to people, he'd talk to guards, he'd talk to other detainees and come back with information. And we recognised really quickly, and I remember how early it was, I remember the discussions we had this, and sort of, we don't need Behrouz as an anonymous quote in our newspaper. We don't need him, you know, even as a source offering information. The work he's doing in that place is journalism, and it's very, very good journalism. And who better to bear witness to what was happening in that place than someone standing in the middle of it? Behrouz's voice, its power, its credibility, its authority would have found a way out into the world just by sheer force of his personality. And the people in this room will experience that tonight when he arrives. I'm really proud he found his voice in the pages of The Guardian, and then elsewhere, and then in books, and then film, and we've seen the talent and the dynamism and the power there. But he really was that sort of clarion voice of Manus Island to tell us, this is what's happening in this place. This is the reality of what's being done with the money of Australian people, in the name of the Australian people, and this is what you need to know. It's no accident. I was in Manus Island and being sort of smuggled in and out of the detention centre in the middle of the night when there was a standoff in late 2017. And you'll remember at the very end of that, when the police came in to take people away, the first person they came for, one of the very first people they came for, was Behrouz Boochani, because they recognised he was the voice of Manus Island, and they recognised how powerful that voice was.
Thank you, Ben. And I guess for me, Zaki, and obviously I'm incredibly biased sitting here next to Zaki, Iraq's ambassador and refugee rights campaigner at Amnesty International, but there have been two names that have really gone hand in hand in terms of hearing from the lived experience and the lived expertise of people seeking asylum and refugees, and that's Behrouz Boochani and Zaki Haidari. And so, Zaki, what has it meant to you having a voice like Behrouz, being an ally with you in this movement?
Thank you. I think, yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's very kind of you. I'll go a step back of, you know, what is it like to be a refugee in a detention center far away from a country that you sought asylum. And that sort of reflects for myself as well, being detained and being then forced to not speak up, you know, forced or, you know, taking your identity away, dehumanizing you in so many levels by the institutions and the government and power that are in place. It's just so wrong for a country like Australia to do that, you know. And then you as a refugee or people seeking asylum coming from a country like Iran or Afghanistan, that you're so, you know, desperate to speak up of the regimes and countries that you sort of flew to seek asylum, and then coming to Australia, hoping that it's a country that does value democracy, freedom of speech, and your basic human rights. And those all will be taken away within hours on your arrival. And then the next thing you know, you're detained just because you're seeking asylum, and everything has been taken away from you. And that includes your name, your identity, your basic humanity. You're basically like, you will be treated like an animal in a cage. It's very depowering and dehumanizing for any refugees. And then from that, you know, raising your voice and exposing the system and the regime by taking all the risks. You know, we had to obey a code of behavior, which was really hard for us to not speak up. In finding ways and allies that you could trust as someone that you normally don't trust, because everyone looks like that they're controlling you. Everyone looks like they're part of the institutions and power that is, you know, on you, controlling you in the cage. It's crucial. And I think Behrouz did an amazing work by using his skill, but also building the trust between refugees and you know, in Manus. It's not just his story, it's his work and skill that build that trust, and then exposing the system by telling his personal stories, but his friends' stories. And I'm sure it pains him when he was seeing his friends killing themselves in this detention center, as it does to a lot of refugees that have been here for the past 10 years. You know, it's hard to say that you're coming with your friends on a boat, or people that you will make friends, and then you all going through the same process, and then witnessing the pain in them to a point that they are so sick that they can't live anymore, taking their lives. So I think I admire his work, and he has provided, you know, a platform that every refugee could see themselves, that if you're under whatever system or institutions, you still could have a voice. And also there are people that you could trust, and you could have a voice. And I think that fear and ally building is very crucial. If you're, for us, if we were detained in a very cagey system that, you know, everything has been taken away from you. And I think Sarah, Ben, and Omid and Madeline, you all played a key role by empowering refugees to have that voice and platform. Of course, it does take courage for refugees to stand up and shine. But we need allies to sort of keep exposing the cruelty of the refugee policies in Australia.
Thank you, Zaki. Munez, I'm going to come to you with a two-part question in just a second. But before I do that, Madeline, a lot of our work as lawyers and people seeking policy reform, we've really had to train the refugee movement, the refugee sector, organisations to ensure that that voice of experience is embedded in our work. How has the voice of someone like Behrouz changed the way we can advocate for policy reforms?
Thanks, Sarah. Fundamentally changed. If I think back to when I started my research on offshore processing just after it was reintroduced in 2012, and at that time there was no information that could really be trusted. The media was not at that point a reliable source of any real information. Ben, I don't know if you're working on it yet. Then you're excluded from this, but I mean mainly the other sources. If you were lucky, you might get a statistic on how many people had been moved where, but then people were basically disappearing into Nauru and Manus Island and would not be heard from again. And the first real turn was, I believe, at the Senate inquiry into the 2014 riots. And that was the first time we started to get testimony from people who'd been inside the camps, although still mainly workers, but at least there was some word getting out of what had happened around that riot, but also what had been happening until that point. And I remember scouring every submission and just thinking, this is quite extraordinary what we're finally learning. And then from then it just gradually, it took a while, but started opening more and more. And you have Behrouz and you had others as well who started to be able to talk out, but at incredible risk. I mean, there's still a degree of risk, but you know, in those earlier years, huge risk. If they'd been caught, if they'd been found, there's no way that we could guarantee that talking to us would not reflect negatively. Given the lack of transparency around, you know, refugee processing and those kinds of things, we couldn't guarantee that talking to us wouldn't result in a negative outcome. So it was very hard at those times. But I mean, we've recently reflected on the positive and more recent times that at a lot of our events now, we have people here amongst us in Australia, finally, who can speak for themselves about what their experience was like. And that has completely shifted the nature of all of these discussions for the better. I can only think how it would have been better if we could have had those voices from the very beginning, telling us from day one what was happening, whether that might have changed something.
Thank you. Munez, in your role at the Kaldor Centre in the Inner West, you work with a really large number of people that have been affected by offshore processing. And I think for me, this time that Behrouz has been in Sydney, and Australia, I've been so heartened to see how many people that we under the law refer to them as transitory people, but how many people have been affected by offshore processing that are coming to those events and speaking to Behrouz and asking him questions and also being inspired to raise their own voice. And I wondered if you could reflect on what's it been your experience in working with that community? Do you see that impact of having Behrouz's voice heard so loudly in the community, bringing them hope that that change may happen, or at least that there are people in Australia that care about how they're being treated?
Thank you, Sarah. First, I just want to say that my heart goes out to the people who are affected by the devastating earthquake in Kurdistan, Turkey and Syria, and who lost their loved ones. So maybe I should start with something interesting that happened 2 days ago when Behrouz was in the parliament. And I just want to talk about how we can support each other for a collective purpose. So when Behrouz was supposed to go to the parliament, one of the women that you mentioned actually approached me, one of the lovely women that usually come to the center. And she said that I really want my voice to be heard in the parliament. And I really want to be connected with Behrouz and see how he can support me. And she's an amazing artist. She painted a very beautiful artwork which reflects her journey and actually her son's journey to Australia. And then Behrouz actually invited her to come to the parliament and took her to the room that he was speaking, and just she spoke with like the Greens member of parliament. Everyone saw her artwork, and everyone listened actually to her story. And then after that, she called me and she said it was the best day that I had after 10 years. Can you imagine how these people are silent, how these people are living in a shadow and they don't have any rights in this country, and they are like totally marginalized.
This is now incredibly uncomfortable, Behrouz, because we're talking about you. And we will soon invite you up so we can have you talk more poetically about yourself. But we're really relieved to see both you and Omid, and thank you so much. Bravo. My final question, and just so perfectly timed, was going to be to Zaki. Zaki, you and myself about 18 months ago had the privilege of going to Parliament House with two other very key advocates for themselves, Tanush and Ramsey. It's no secret that I was incredibly emotional that day walking into Parliament House with the two of them, addressing parliamentarians in Parliament House, having been expelled to Manus Island and being, you know, the first two to really be able to do that. And it was incredibly moving, it was incredibly special, and it was incredibly powerful. You had the privilege of being there with Behrouz this week, speaking to parliamentarians and seeing the reactions of advisors and ministers and the parliament. How impactful are those moments for our advocacy?
Thank you. Yeah, I was at Behrouz's press conference in the Parliament House. Again, I think it's the reflection of the shift in conversation of refugees, people seeking asylum, you know, labeled in so many different awful labels that I don't want to mention any of them. Once that in the same house as Behrouz was reflecting, they were making decisions that were affecting lives. They were making decisions about fathers, about mothers, about families, about children in Nauru, in children in detention center, where they never met them. They never listened to their stories, or even if they did, they were so ignorant that they ignored the pain and suffering of those thousands of refugees that send them off to offshore, or keep them in detention center, or keep them in community. We have created this awful situation for people like myself, that we still don't feel like we are equal citizen to an Australian citizen or equal human being, because by the system that they created with the refugee policies, different visa type, having those awful experience and then going to Parliament House at the same place that are making decisions, talking to the politician directly, like having Behrouz in front of camera in media. I think it's a shocking moment for the Australian politics, for the Australian media and society, that these refugees are not what you've been told. You know, they're normal human being, they're extraordinary human being. You know, I think that the whole conversation has changed in the past 10 years. And I think that human connection, but also using your skills and power to attack politicians, not physically, of course, but by your skills and power to say that I am powerful than you. You know, I have skills and knowledge that you don't have. and I'm still a human being. I'm as human as you are. And Behrouz has shown that. Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to thank some skilled and powerful individuals, Madeline Gleeson and Zaki Haidari, for joining us for the beginning framing of this conversation. Thank you both. And accordingly, Behrouz, please come join us, and Omid as well. Please come and join us. Behrouz, we waited almost 10 years for you to be here, so waiting a little bit longer seems like not something that we could all refute. So we're really glad that you've made it. We're sorry that Sydney has put on a terrible weather show for you, but we're really, really grateful to have you here for this conversation. We've been reflecting on the power of your advocacy, and I noted at the beginning how ridiculous it is that we were having that conversation about you and not with you, because really you are the most powerful voice in this room. And so I'm going to take you back to the very beginning, if that's all right. And when you were in Manus and you were detained and Australia had exiled you, you decided to reach out. And I'd love to get into your mind and understand what was that original motivation to reach out, and why reach out to Australia, and what formed that decision for you to reach out to journalists, to advocates, and what was your strategy and motivation at that beginning time for you?
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to say hello to everyone. Yeah, we had a very long day. I don't know that you spoke about it or not, but 7 hours we were just flying. Then we were stuck in the airport, and then, but on the taxi was quite, yeah. Yeah, every level. I think always I say that people look at the end of the journey or end of a story, that but people always forget about the beginning. On that time that I arrived in Australia, I arrived in Christmas Island, and they banished me to Manus Island. I think the making decision to smuggle a phone into the prison camp and communicate or try to find someone in Australia or other part of the world, I think that needed something that I feel that I borrowed from my background as a Kurdish, my background from like resistance knowledge that we have in Kurdistan, a kind of, but it was very difficult to reach out to find people. And I remember the first person that I wanted to find out was a refugee in Indonesia, that he was in touch with a journalist that when we almost drowned in the water, they took us from water and they put us in a hotel. He took photo of us. So I don't remember his name. I think his name was Michael or something like that. So that was the first person that I tried to. Yeah. Then other people, but I don't know how I met Ben. I don't remember exactly, but
all of a sudden your phone number was given to me as someone to talk to, and we started this. I don't know how. I wish we'd kept the messages now, but it was I was just sending these messages out in saying, "My name's Ben. I'm a journalist from Australia. I understand I understand you're on Manus Island." We just started this very quiet conversation, I suppose. And I remember getting the sense back from you of being very nervous, very reticent, and understandably very not slow to trust, but just wary, I suppose. Well, who is this person on the other end? You had no idea who I was or my motivations or anything like that. And it just took, I do remember over months going back and forth, and we just slowly built the this relationship and this sense of trust. I remember I had a young daughter at the time, so I was keeping strange hours as well. So you're always sending messages like 2 a.m. I was like, what are you awake for? But that was when they were sort of coming back and forth, and we just gradually sort of developed this. I think from my end, we developed a trust in you very, very quickly, because the information was very powerful, was very clear, was very accurate. Everything you told us, we'd go and check out and found out that it was absolutely correct. And I think, understandably from your end, that trust was a little bit slower to build. But I also felt that, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, that being a journalist, your background as a Kurdish journalist, your background, writing in a resistance form of writing, what you were doing in Manus was a continuation of that, and it gave you a real. This was the feeling I got from thousands of kilometres. This real sense of purpose, and for so many of the men held on Manus Island, there was this aimlessness, this listlessness, because there was nothing. Every day was exactly the same as the last day, and there was the indefinite wearing nature of detention. Really was very, very difficult on people's mental health, and everyone in this room will know of those impacts. But for you, every morning, every day, there was a purpose. There was a reason to get out of bed. There was a task to do, and it feels to me that journalism was this incredibly powerful tool for you to grab onto, not only for the work that you did, but for yourself as well in that place.
Yeah, but I think I should say something about my relationship with Ben, and also Omid and some others. But with Ben particularly, when you are in a prison camp, when you are a refugee, there is an imbalance in power. And so that when you approach a detainee or a refugee, of course, always I felt that the journalists, they treated me very unequal. It was not equal relationship, and that always made me angry at them. And many journalists, especially the first 2-3 years, they treated me like that, and always they made me angry. So that was a part of my motivation as well, to punish these journalists. And my work, Yeah. So I was not resisting only against the government. Sometimes I felt that I am resisting against organizations as well. I'm resisting against media as well. That's why, and I mentioned that in the parliament the other day. But I think that is very important, that when you work, people always judge refugees. The image of refugee, that word, that concept is very powerful. And people see refugees, judge refugees, and see them less. So that's why always I had a challenge with them, But I just stopped fighting against organizations, because you cannot fight with everyone. Yeah, I'm tired of that.
I would hate to have seen what resistance you showed the lawyers, Behrouz. Yeah, I know. I think what we've touched on here is the real sense of responsibility that was shared by Omid, Munez, Ben, and I know even in our work at RACS, we share a real responsibility for carrying these stories, for preserving these voices, and for protecting the people that we're engaging with from risk. And so I wonder if I can hear from you each, Omid, Munez, and Ben, in journalism, in media, in writing, in preparing these such incredibly impactful pieces that you have. How do we do that better? What have you learned from this process, and what can we learn from this about responsibility, preservation, and risk? I'll go to you first, Omid.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you to the organisers as well. I think I'd like to say just off the bat that today wasn't, the delays and the difficulties today weren't a complete loss. In fact, going through all of that, the whole process, the delays, the uncertainty, the anxiety, the kind of the feeling that everyone's waiting for us, letting people down, and of course all the different conversations and issues and problems that we were going through, it reminded me of the process working with you when you were in Manus Prison. You know, the constant changes in policy, the difficulties organizing some kind of strategy, thinking about the techniques we were using, and of course the stress, the anxiety, and the feeling that, you know, maybe there's a chance I might let you down in some way. Like all of that was, you know, in some small way, I was feeling that today as we were trying to get here on time, and I was having flashbacks. So I think what's really important to acknowledge is that in the very beginning, there were very few people that we could rely on, we could trust as well when working in this space. But I think it was the minute I read Behrouz's article in The Guardian, the first article you published under your real name, the article that you translated, Munis. When I first read that, I thought, first of all, I've been working in this space for some time. Why don't I know about this person? Why isn't there more conversation in the different sort of circles that I'm mixing in and I work in? Why is this person not a part of that conversation? And I really wanted to contribute in some way to bring Behrouz in. I read his work, and once I contacted him and we started a relationship, I read more examples of his work. I started to translate, and I thought, this person needs to be an integral part of many discourses. And I want to introduce this particular individual, this particular activist, this thinker, this creative, this intellectual. I want to introduce them to different spaces where maybe this kind of voice doesn't have an opportunity to share and to contribute. So it was a massive responsibility, and I had all of these grand ideas about how that should happen, how that should take place. But also I was convinced that it can happen. I believed in it. And I think that's one of the things when working in this space is to believe in people from the very beginning, to really have faith that something can change with new kinds of collaboration, new kinds of interactions, new kind of knowledge production. And of course, then I met Munis and Ben and other people, and that network, that collaboration just kept growing. I think something magical happened when all of these came together. So just to finish in relation to what you mentioned about what can be done better, how people can support, I think a lot of people have good intentions, but it's important that some kind of practical institutional support is put in place, some kind of mechanisms where when something like this arises, when somebody produces something special, and that initial struggle, those difficulties, those obstacles don't exist anymore. We can move into new spaces and create the same kind of magic, I think.
Thank you. So I'll start with when Behrouz started just texting me on WhatsApp. And I think you all know that one of the advocates, Shane Buzzy, put us in touch. And I can't remember those dark and silent nights on Manus. And as Ben said, yeah, I was constantly receiving text messages, regardless what time it was. And it was a big responsibility, really. So it was a matter of urgency to translate his work. Because something happened at Manus, and it should be heard, it should be published by media. So we were working really tirelessly, and I was really like inspired and amazed by Behrouz how he is an intellectual person, how he can like analyze everything and put them like in the best way in the words, like in terms of having his literary skills and at the same time analytical skills. And then I should confess, when Omid came on board, it was such a big relief for me, because then I could just share the burden with Omid, and actually later he just accepted more burden than me. But so apart from all the articles and all like Behrouz communication with advocates and journalists and lawyers, the book, like No Friend But the Mountains, was a really huge responsibility, because he was writing them on WhatsApp messages, and something suddenly happened on Manist. Maybe some people like attempted suicide, or like other tragedies that we all know about them. And then he got busy with other things like writing articles or doing other advocacy work. And for example, after like 2 months, he was asking me that, okay, Munes, can you just send me the last paragraph that I wrote for my book? So it was a really big responsibility for for me to keep them like all in the orders and all in the chapters. But as I said, when Omid came on board, it was a huge relief, because of his academic background, because of his understanding about like the policies here, and he grew up here, and all of his experience working in this space. So yeah, so it's an opportunity to thank Omid as well here now.
I think journalistically, you have to be aware of that obligation. You have to be aware of the context of your reporting. As a journalist, your obligation is to accuracy, is to truth, is to the best version of truth that you can find to put on the page or that you can broadcast. But you do need to be aware of the context of the work that you're doing and the potential ramifications. And it is the case that in this country, governments not very long ago, there were governments in this country that would punish refugees and asylum seekers for speaking out, and there were ramifications for their situation. So you're always supremely conscious when people are in vulnerable situations, people are in difficult situations, that you're not contributing to that, you're not exacerbating that, you're not putting them at unnecessary risk. And you do feel a real sense of obligation because of the risk that people are taking to talk to you. Behrouz, you speaking to me, or others speaking, saying, I want this to go out into the world, I need this to go out into the world, but you're very conscious of those risks, and so am I. And I think journalism, without an awareness of those risks, without an obligation to that, is a very fraught exercise, is very risky. And the other obligation I think that exists journalistically is to stay on the story. It's not just, we're just going to tell this one story, we're going to have a splash on Saturday and we move on to the new thing. It's to come back, to come time and time again to it, to be there again, I think is another obligation.
Can I add something? Yeah, you gave me permission before this event. Okay, and also, yeah, Behrouz, I think in one of his article mentioned duty to history, and I really like this. So I think it was and it is our duty to history to just fight against the oppressive systems.
Yeah, I think on that time I had this conversation with them, that I look at it as of course, a duty, but as a mission as well. And I was aware of what I'm going to do, what I am doing, and that is, I think, is very important in that context. And that's why even thinking about bringing a phone in, smuggling a phone in, and try to write, I think that is a big thing. That was the first step, but it was the biggest step, I think, because it was on the right time at beginning, and that took like at least 2 years that I felt that I established a network around myself so I can publish my own work. So, but think it was very difficult as well, you know, that media, I remember on that time I worked with Michael Gordon from The Age. And yeah, Michael was a really great journalist and great friend. He suggested to The Age and Sydney Morning Herald to let me to write a column per week, and the editor refused. You know, so I mean that was difficult for being a journalist there in that context as a refugee in Manus Island, in a place that already, you know, designed to dehumanize us. We already were dehumanized in the media. We already were dehumanized by the politicians. So I think that's why I have a huge respect to Ben and Guardian. That was important because they created a way, you know, and later other people, other refugees. I think now for refugees, much easier to write something and publish it. But at the beginning, that was very difficult. I know that how we were struggling, even with the organization MEAA. So it's better I don't mention their names, but yeah, but many organizations, many human rights defenders, many names in this field, and they didn't trust in what I was doing, you know, and that's why I think being aware of that is very important and understand it. Yeah.
Actually, that example of the Sydney Morning Herald is good representation of what I was saying about practical or institutional support or the lack of it.
So we are, of course, running a little bit late. So I will take the liberty of going a little bit later than we originally thought, because I'm sure we all want to hear from Behrouz as much as we can this evening, and from Omid and Munez. We do have a comment, Behrouz. We've got a lot of support online saying how wonderful it is to see you in Australia and what an inspiration you have been. And we are getting a few questions online. We'll have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. I'll have a look at what's online and see how many hands there are in the audience this evening. But it is impossible to have this conversation with the 3 of you without acknowledging the resistance in Iran. And so I wanted to go to you first, Behrouz, and ask you, how did your resistance in Iran inform your work whilst in Manus to now inform the resistance movement and your activities now?
My position in Iran is very different. Yeah, so I'm quite unpopular among many people. And it's very difficult position because in Iran, you know, we are at the beginning of this, if we call it post-colonial knowledge. So it's very difficult, but what we are doing, people like me, just not fighting against I think it's very difficult if I talk about it, against Persian supremacy in Iran, that the structure, we should fight against the media as well. You know, the media who don't want to give us platform, or they want to take our the platform from us. So it's very difficult, it's very complicated. But for now, my role, my work in Iran is just to sometimes shake that nation through social media. But of course, I get attacked. but I already accepted that position, that role. But hopefully that among Iranians with different backgrounds, we have a proper conversation and discussion, that people in Iran know that that country is not only Persian. That country is not only Persian, that country is with different people with different background and ethnic background. That's what we are doing in Iran, but it's very difficult because, yeah, I think I'm angry.
I mean,
I think in times like this, with all of these excellent things happening at one time, Behrouz being able to come here and join us, a new book, events like this, new forms of support, new opportunities. We want to celebrate. We want to express joy, but we're heartbroken about what's happening back in Iran, and we want to do something. We want to acknowledge the resistance on the street, the people who are dying on the street, the people who have been executed, the people who are fighting and risking everything for freedom, for the future of Iran. And I think in relation to the work that we've done together, Behrouz, Munis, and myself, I think we can interpret that as a really special model. I think it's a unique dynamic between us. First of all, Behrouz, a member of a marginalized ethnic groups, persecuted ethnic group in Iran. Munis, a woman who has lived under a patriarchal, oppressive system for most of her life, and knows what it means to experience that kind of violence from the state. And myself, someone who left around the time of the revolution, also from a persecuted, suppressed group in Iran, based on socio-religious status, not on ethnicity. But when we understood each other because of that shared form of marginalization, that those similarities between our experiences and our perspectives. And I think when we came together and we started working, something special happened. And I think we see the results of that now. A particular kind of magic emerged. And I personally think of this as a model for so many other projects, political projects, but also creative projects too. So working with other people who have experienced displacement, exile, and incarceration. And in addition, collective action, collective resistance back home as well. What we're doing, I think, can inspire and act as a model, as I said, for something much bigger.
Munez.
Yeah, actually, I found a lot of similarity between the prisons in Iran and offshore detention. And I made a list, to be honest, like not access to proper legal representative, lawyers, and fair system, rape, systematic torture, improper prison environment, family separation, and a lot more. So I don't want to just talk a lot, but I really want to pay my respect to ethnic communities and all marginalized people in Iran. That's why I chose a poet that Rosa beautifully included in her article. Rosa is one of the collaborators of this book. And the poet is by the poem actually is by a poet, Kurdish poet called Shirkuh Bikas. And I'm gonna read like a part of it, if you don't mind, because I love literature. Is that okay? Okay. My oath is smoke. My words are ashes. My screams are my frozen blood and a downhill migration. Ever since there was migration, I'm migrating. Ever since there was a blaze, I'm burning. Ever since there was water, I'm drowning. Ever since there was razor, I'm sacrifice. Ever since there was land, I'm landless. Ever since there was mountain, I'm tumbling. Ever since there was stick, I'm being beaten. I, before Moses, am a refugee. Before Jesus, I'm a crucified. Before Quraysh, I'm being buried alive. Before Hussein, I'm being beheaded. And Rosa is here today. Yeah, can you just...
I just want to acknowledge one point. I think something that Munis and I as translators really appreciate. Rosa also translated that into English.
Yes, exactly.
Would you? And Sherko Bekas was a massive inspiration for Behrouz. I think all the, in No Friend But the Mountains, all the poetic sections, not all of them, but many of them have represent dream visions. And that's something that Behrouz learned from or used as a model when from Sherko Bekas. And Sherko Bekas was also a journalist.
I'm going to throw it open to the floor in just one moment, and thank you to the people online who have posted their questions. I'm going to take the liberty of merging some of them, so please don't feel I've forgotten you. But there is one quite impactful question, Behrouz, which I would like to put to you today, and that is, today, what does freedom mean?
That is a very hard question. Always imagine freedom when I was in Manousan, a very simple picture. That walk on the street and listen to music. That's very simple, but yeah, I don't know really what's the definition of freedom, the meaning of freedom. But for me, yeah, it's very difficult. I don't know. It's a very general question. Yeah.
Any questions from the floor? Noting that I'm going to take some liberties to really cut you off if you're going too quickly. Yep. Okay, Jane. Mm-hmm.
I'm probably one of the people that was too bossy and too rude. And it's been a great honor learning from you and from this team how to talk and how to learn. What is it that we can do apart from regional processing to dismantle sovereign borders? It seems to underpin the renewal of Nauru, and it seems to be causing a lot of ongoing pain. How can we end this?
Yeah, I think the problem in this country is that we are facing a detention industry. It is an industry. It is a border industry, detention industry, and the many companies are a part of this. Security companies, a company like IHMS and other companies. So, and there is money there, you know, corruption there. It's a corrupt system. So while there is an industry, I think it's very difficult to change this. They want to keep the industry. You know, Ben published a story, I think 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, about the new contract that they made with an American company, $420 million just to keep 70 people in Nauru. So that is the problem, you know, in this country. And I think we should chase the money. We should chase the companies. It's very interesting. Before I come, the first night that I came to Australia, the first day, I saw that I booked a room in Mantra Hotel for me. Yeah, you know, yeah, they didn't know the person who organized that. And then I say that we should change it because I cannot be there. And that shows that how this system works. How this system works, how the violence in this country, in this society, a big part of it is invisible, and how sometimes people who are working to support refugees, who are fighting against this system, they are getting fund or they are feeding from those companies, but they are not aware of it. You know, like sometimes you do a work about refugees, you make an artwork, you go to a gallery, but you don't know that actually Wilson Security Company has a contract with that. You know, it's like that. Even for me, that I came to Australia and they booked a room in Mantra Hotel for me. So, I mean, that is the problem in this country, this network, this huge network.
And it was like such a shame that after Behrouz's presence in the parliament in the afternoon, the Labour government and in the parliament, they extended their contract with Nauruan government till 2033. Very shameful.
I'm going to quickly go to Graham at the back, and then Fran at the front has a question. Sorry to make you run around, Francis.
Hi, Behrouz. Always great to see you again. I guess my question is both to you and to Ben, following the evidence at the recent Robodebt inquiry, where it was made very clear that the government, in order to silence anybody who criticised what was happening under Robodebt, targeted the individuals who dared to speak up, to create fear, to stop others from speaking up. I'm wondering, how did you deal with that? What was your experiences around the fear that the government tried to create targeting you? And Ben, as a journalist who is seeing that information fed to other agencies, to friendly agencies, as it was quoted at the inquiry, how do you deal with that, and how do you try and combat that when you know the government is deliberately trying to silence people?
I mean, that exposure at the Royal Commission was a pretty ugly moment for journalism. No one likes to see how the sausages get made, but I think it was really important to expose the way that was being done, and the fact that there are pliant journalists who can basically be bought off for these stories and fed this information. They'll report it uncritically. They won't question it. They won't interrogate it all, and they'll splash it on the front page. And the implications for that, the ramifications of that on people's lives are immense, as we saw in the Robodebt scandal. You know, we had people driven to self-harm. We had people driven to suicide by that, and that was a deliberate effort, not only to cow those people who'd spoken out, but to warn others against doing exactly the same thing, to cow others into silence. And that was a brutal exposure of the kind of, you know, nasty realities of the nasty reality of the way politics can get played in this country. And I think Behrouz is about to tell you, and we were really conscious of this, that Behrouz suffered for what he did. He suffered for his work on Manus Island. He was dragged off to Chalka more than once, and held in isolation, held in confinement where he couldn't speak. And that was not only to silence him, but to silence others as well. That was a deliberate response with a deliberate outcome in mind. And as a journalist, I think you need to be supremely conscious of what those potential ramifications are. And it's not to say that you shy away from those difficult stories. It's not to say that you don't report things or you run dead on stories because because you fear the outcome, but you have to find ways to protect people. You have to find ways to be careful that you're not making a difficult situation, a dangerous situation, even worse. You do have to be aware of the consequences of what you report. We don't report in a vacuum. There are contexts to all of these things.
Yeah, I remember that. So I think for 4 years, anyone who within the system who would report about, from the staff and people who were working there, they put them in the prison for 2 years. That was the rule. That was the law on that time. And later they changed it, I think, what I remember. Yeah, but of course they didn't tolerate any journalist or reporter or anyone who worked against that system. And I remember that Ben, his photo, they shared it, immigration in the Manus Island and in the office. Yeah, that anyone who see this guy, just let us know. Yeah.
We that photo remains sort of on a pillar in the middle of the Guardian newsroom, and it says "Tok Save," which is sort of like warning in pidgin. It says, if you see a terrible reproduction of a picture of me, I would have sent them a better one if they were going to find you. But if you see this gentleman, please report him to your manager immediately, because the Australian government knew I'd been given a visa, and so they were aware that I was going to be on Manus Island. So people were being warned. So they went to extraordinary levels to stop the flow of information. I had private investigators hired to find who my sources were for stories. I had phones tapped. I had, people would turn up at events to kind of see what I was saying and see where I was going and see who I was talking to. Like these sorts of extraordinary efforts that you kind of don't believe are really going to happen. You think surely not, but that was the level that people were prepared to go to.
And another story is that. A story we worked together, if you remember, about LGBTQ people in Manus. And later a report and document released by Crikey, the media. Crikey, yeah. And say that on that time, because that was one of the first stories, the immigration employed a detective to go and find out who was actually source for that story. That but Omid was deported as well from Manus.
I visited Behrouz for the first time in 2016, and about 70% roughly of No Friend But the Mountains had been translated. And I wanted to get everything right, and I knew how important this book was going to be. So I wanted to sit down with him and go through all the decisions that I made in terms of translation, make sure that I interpreted everything correctly. And so that was in 2016. The day I arrived was the day, unfortunately, they found the dead body of Hamed Shamshiripur. And that was my first experience, my first encounter at Manus. And we were busy for about 5-6 days working with journalists and trying to address all of the different inquiries and requests for information. And then we could get started on the book. I went back to Manus on 2 other occasions after that. The third time that I was there was when we did a lot of the filming for Australian Story for the ABC. And I got picked up at the airport on the way back to Australia, and they wrote down my name. They asked me what I was doing and all sorts of things, and took me into a isolated office. And then on the 4th time I tried to go to PNG, I didn't even get through the airport at Port Moresby. The very next day I was on the first plane back to Australia, and I'm blacklisted now in PNG. And I think this relationship between what happens in Manus and the norms, the values, the principles, the different sorts of systems of control in Australia, I think is something that should be analysed a lot more. It's something that we're working on in terms of Manus prison theory, but what happens in Manus is to people like Ben, to me and others, it's a reflection of some of the rights, the liberties that are being taken away from us right here. This should be seen as an experiment.
My name is Fran. I'm a journalist with the ABC. Behrouz, I've been dying to, I have so many questions, but I wonder what it was like for you, the decision to come to Australia, and then the moment you arrived in Australia and this time you spent here, given what we've been talking about, the industry, the violence as you described it, and particularly coming to Parliament House, but just to come back here, was that sort of, you know, they said you'd never step foot in Australia, here you are. Did you feel sort of gratified that you'd got through, or fearful or furious, or what were was there a mix of feelings?
Thank you. I didn't want to come to Australia just to visit. I wanted to come with something, you know, and I came with that book. You know, that's why, because, you know, generally Australia, for many years, this government say that people use New Zealand as a backdoor. If we send refugees to New Zealand, then they come to Australia. But I cannot ignore that I'm connected to this country because I've been contributing to culture and political culture in this country. So I cannot ignore that. I've been working with many people in Australia, with civil society, within artists, writers, with many people that I've worked with. And of course, I'm connected to this country and I cannot ignore that. And I cannot ignore that experience. And also, still so much to do. Still, I say that still people, 70 people are in Port Moresby, 70 people are in Nauru. Still, the policy exists. Still, this detention industry exists. So I am responsible about that. But of course, I don't want to just work about refugees. I want to do something else, and that's what I'm doing. I want to write about something else. And I've written about something else, different stories. And I look at it as a resistance, because in the West, people, the media put you in a box if you be a minority or if you're a refugee, or they put you in a box and they expect that you always write about that box. You know, and that's why I want to write about something else. And I'm doing that. And I look at it as a resistance. I want to write about something is not about refugees. So, but visiting Australia, that I came here, I came with a book. And we've done so much work since I've been here. I think we've done at least 20 events across Australia. And the good thing is about my journey to Australia is that I am free to go back to New Zealand whenever I want. You know, so I'm not very, it's not like before, it's a different story. But the interesting thing is, when I was in Manus Island, people, not people, some trolls in Australia, they always say to me that go back to Iran. And now, some of them put the comment, go back to New Zealand. Yeah, that was a good feeling, actually. I feel that I have a place to go.
Behrouz, tonight, since I have the microphone, I get to afford myself the opportunity of the final question. And Fran has stolen a little bit of my thunder, but I'm going to tweak it slightly. Welcoming you to Sydney, Behrouz, is something that I will personally and professionally carry with me as a highlight for the rest of my life. I want to acknowledge you, and I want to acknowledge that you carry a deep and heavy weight in this world. We call upon you to recall your experiences. We call upon you to call for change and accountability. You're speaking truth to power every day. And it's important to remember in all of this that you're here in 2023, highlighting that it is the current government indeed that sent you to Papua New Guinea. All of this is an insurmountable load to bear. Since arriving in Australia, you've proven Peter Dutton wrong. You've spoken at Parliament House, the very place that decided your fate. You've had Minister Dan Tehan call you by name, a failing so many coalition politicians could not do for almost a decade. You've addressed thousands of people. You've been able to reconnect with many of your brothers and allies. Your journey to Australia has been an incredible one. And I'd like you to end by telling us, what do you take back to New Zealand from this experience?
Again, a very hard question, always. Yeah. Before I come to Australia, when I arrived in the airport in Melbourne, I was quite nervous because for many years I was working, and I work with many people, many projects that probably even people who follow my works, they are not aware of them, you know, many projects, many different kind of works. And I felt that we created a resistance knowledge through our work, you know, body of works that we created. And I felt that we impacted on Australia, we affected on Australia. But when I was in the airport, I felt that I'm wrong. Yeah, for a second I was not sure about it, you know. But it was very interesting. When I arrived there, the officer who checked my strange passport, because my passport is a refugee travel document, and look at me and say that I made with Australian accent. Yeah, you look familiar. Yeah. Yeah. Then I said, oh yeah. So when I passed the gate, yeah, and I met people, I felt relaxed. So in Australia, this is my feeling that I've been relaxed because I say that I cannot, I've been working with a part of civil society in Australia. I cannot ignore that. So now that I go back, I feel better. And generally, politically, I'm an angry person. Deliberately, I want to be angry, but in a personal life, of course, I'm not. We need that political anger. Yeah, so I always keep that anger politically, but within myself, my soul, I think I'm peaceful enough. So that's what I take. And another thing that I didn't like that, I didn't think that I am connected to New Zealand. But when I came here, I feel that I'm connected to New Zealand. So I want to go back home.
Behrouz, I think it's clear that this room and so many people in Australia completely disagree with the Australian government, and you will always be a much loved and respected member of this community. So thank you. I now invite Jane to come and give us a closing vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I apologise for standing directly in front of you, but that's where the camera is. I'd like to echo the thanks that Sarah just expressed to our entire panel, including our earlier additional panelists who so graciously took the floor. Behrouz, Omid, Munis, thank you for together exposing so much of what Australia has done to destroy people's lives, to create a policy that unfortunately has been exported to other countries, and that is a policy and laws that we know are in violation of our and other countries' international obligations. Behrouz, I really apologise for standing in front of you here. This is your life experience, and for that, I and all of us here are deeply, deeply sorry. Thank you for continuing to raise your voice against the system here, and your voice to try and end the anguish for those still held offshore and people languishing here in Australia on temporary protection visas. And to echo your words, Behrouz, may you walk on the street and listen to music. That's freedom. I'd like to thank all of you who support refugees and people seeking asylum in everything that you do, whether it be through direct advocacy, through research, through activism, through philanthropy, the many, many ways that people here can assist. And we acknowledge too the millions of people around the world who are displaced, who are still seeking protection. We honour their strength, courage, determination, and humanity. I'd like to thank Allens for hosting us so generously here tonight. And I'd like to thank all of you here in person and online for joining us. And I hope that you leave inspired in your own path of creative resistance. Thank you very much.